Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Somebody answer me or something. My name is Karen Filler, and on behalf of Skidompha Library, I'd like to welcome all of you to the Emil Landau Human Rights Forum. This annual event was established in 2008 to honor the memory of Emil Landau by providing a continuing structure to help all people in our community of all ages commit to the understanding that we treat each other with respect and tolerance. He was a survivor of the Holocaust and an inspiration to the young and old. Emil Landau was part of our community in many ways and for many years. He believed in the importance of libraries for all people, and was a member of the Skidompha Board of Directors. He participated in the planning of the building of this building. As a frequent speaker at schools, Emil's message always came back to human rights. We are honored tonight to have Carolyn Landau with us. She has lent her support to the annual event ever since its inception. Thank you, Carolyn. Welcome. The forum committee members are Louise Belknap, Sarah Burkett, Stephen Dixon, Phoebe Nichols, and Mary Kate Rennie. I'd like to turn the program over to Stephen Dixon, who is our moderator.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming to this panel discussion. Come get a seat, that's great.
Sorry we're late.
No, go ahead.
You going to sit there?
Sure.
Plenty of seats.
Said, Uncle, you're coming.
As Karen said, I will be the moderator tonight. First of all, I would like to go over the format of tonight's program. There will be 10-minute presentations by each of the panelists, followed by a 30-minute question and answer session. I will call on people wishing to ask questions after all 3 presentations have been made. You may wish to direct your question to a particular panelist, or you may direct your question to the panel in general. If you have a particularly personal question, you may want to get contact information from the panelists so that you can ask the question in private. There will be a sign-up sheet out in the hall if that's your case. Our panelists this evening. Oh, also it says, please turn off all your cell phones. Our panelists this evening, the first one is Elise Johansen. She's Executive Director of Equality Maine. Elise has over 12 years' experience working on systems in creating needed changes to ensure all people are treated with integrity and care. She holds a Master's in Fine Arts degree from Fairleigh Dickinson University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English with a concentration in studies of writing and rhetoric from Florida Atlantic University. When I mentioned this to Pam this morning, she goes, "Why didn't I get a degree in rhetoric?" That sounds like a wonderful degree. Jeanne Dooley, and she's the Executive Director of Out As I Want to Be. Jeanne has many years' experience in Washington, D.C., working at the national level of the American Bar Association and the American Association of Retired People. Of course, we wouldn't know what that was. AARP. Through her directorship of the Massachusetts State Office of AARP, to her recent work with both national and local organizations providing strategic planning, training, and marketing support. Out As I Want to Be is the only group serving LGBTQ youth in Mid-Coast area. Out assists LGBTQ youth age 22 and under in their journey from adolescence to adulthood. Jeanne attended Manhattanville College in New York and holds a master's degree in social work. Quinn Gormley is a 2012 graduate of Lincoln Academy. A resident of Damariscotta since 1994, Quinn was pivotal in developing the LA Gay Straight Alliance and continues to be active in advancing LGBTQ and transgender human rights in Mid-Coast Maine and nationally in various capacities. I will now turn the next 30 minutes over to our panelists, who will tell you about their organizations and what and how they do to support the human rights of the LGBTQ community. When all three have finished, we will open the forum for the question and answer part of the evening, which should go on for another 30 minutes or so. So it's my distinct pleasure to start off our panel discussion tonight with Elise Johansen.
So before I begin, I just wanted to take a really quick second for us to go through our preferred gender pronouns. And so preferred gender pronouns are just a way for people to not assume the way we express our gender, and that way you know how we prefer to be referred to. And so, like Stephen said, I'm Elise Johansen, and I use she, her, and hers.
I'm Jeanne Dooley, and I also use she, her, and hers. Quinn Gormley, and I also use she, her, and hers.
I should have just said that square. Or cute. So, thank you for having me here. It's an honor. I live in Brunswick, and so I kind of consider myself mid-coast, but I know other people that live in the mid-coast don't consider me a mid-coast person. So, how many folks here have heard of Equality Maine? Raise your hand. Of course, good. How many people volunteered or did something around marriage work in '09? Okay, great. In 2012 is the same, okay. What about people worked on Maine Won't Discriminate, the non-discrimination? Great, awesome, okay. So, when I applied to become the executive director at Equality Maine, my mom, who's in the audience, who's a huge ally, said, what's there left to do in Maine? What do you need to do? That's amazing, you know? And so, living here and owning a home here and being married here, it's a progressive, fantastic state, as we all know, but there's still a lot of work to do. Just look at the polls last night. It was kind of a day of mourning for a lot of us. Wherever you fall on the political pendulum, there were probably races you felt great about and some you didn't feel so good about. And so I woke up this morning trying to find this place of feeling, how do I move forward, and how do I empower my team, and how do I empower my board to not take this as such a huge hit, and how do we move forward and focus on the work that still needs to be done. And I know Jeanne, as a fellow ED, is probably going to be working on that as well. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing with Equality Maine as our statewide organization for LGBTQ advocacy, outreach, education, political action, and what are we doing post-marriage, and what does that mean? And so we have a strategic plan that started about 1.5 years ago, and we are focusing on a couple different areas. So we're working with young people, which Jeanne's going to really go into why that work is so paramount right now. We are also working on ending transgender healthcare discrimination. How many people are aware that there's discrimination going on in Maine against our transgender family members and community members? Okay, so that's great that you all know that. One of the things that we're finding out is while we're talking to people across the state, our largest allies are like, what do you mean that people who are transgender are being discriminated against with regards to healthcare? We have a non-discrimination law. That can't be possible, but it is, and it's happening here, and that's not the way we do things here in Maine. And so we're working really hard on changing that. Whatever comes this session, that's going to be a much heavier lift than we were hoping it would be. We're also working with elders. We have a really great coalition of people across the state, including SAGE. Our AARP group is fantastic, and so we're trying to start some community conversations in the coming months about how do we ensure that our LGBTQ elders don't need to go back into the closet when entering a nursing home or an assisted care facility. This is really important because people that identify as LGBTQ and are elders were brought up at a different time and need to be honored and respected for who they are and be able to be who they are in that part of their life. We are also working in the rural parts of our state, and so Equality Maine, although we're statewide, we're not seen as much in some parts of our state as much as we should be. And that's something that's really important to me as the ED there, but also is important to our board, that every single thing we do at Equality Maine is that we're doing it in all parts, and as many counties as we possibly can. So we're in Oxford County, we're in Lincoln County, we're all over the place. I just met someone the other day who wants me to come up to Fort Kent, which I'm really excited that we got invited by someone who is a pretty high position at one of the schools there, for us to be invited to come into their school in Fort Kent, which was incredible.
Sorry.
No, that's great, you're here. So despite the incredible legal victories we've had over the past many years, there's still a lot of work to do. And so we know, for people who have been maybe reading the news a little bit before, last week I think it was, or the week before, there was a hate crime that happened in Lewiston, Auburn, which is 25 minutes from my house. And so when that happens kind of that close to home, it gives me this more fire where I can say to people, this isn't in some far off place where you're thinking, well, over there, you know, they're just kind of still backwards. No, this is happening everywhere. And so, and I don't want to create too dire of a picture, but it is still really critical. And until people aren't facing discrimination or bias or hatred in their homes, in their towns, in their schools, in the healthcare system, one system that's especially near and dear to me is the juvenile justice and correctional systems. I worked really closely with that work in Florida, and we're trying to figure out what are the policies and procedures here in Maine in those systems, and how do we make sure that they're really open and accepting and honoring of people. We also have something called our New Leaders Project, and I think I have to tie up in about 2 minutes, but I wanted to talk about, we have this program for young people across the state who identify as LGBTQ or allied, and they run through the project. We worked with Jeanne on this in our first inaugural class last year. We run 3 sessions of this, and we're starting the new one in December or January. It happens all over Maine, so we've done it in Rockland, we've done it in Bangor, and we've done it in Portland, and we think the next session will either be in Waterville or possibly Lewiston, Auburn. We're not 100% sure yet, depends on where the youth have the most desire for us to be. And it is a program for them to practice leadership skills, civic engagement, and they all work on a project. They learn how to facilitate a meeting, how to do an ask. How do you ask of your community for something that you need, that you want to see happen? Whether that be you need funding for a project, or you need people to canvass for you or to help share a message. And so one thing that we just found out about recently is I wrote a grant to the U.S. Department of State at our U.S. Embassy in Russia, and we have a project that we're going to be working on with a LGBTQ group in Russia, and serving their youth and our youth, and having the adults talk to the adults there as a way to create some camaraderie, some solidarity, and also to empower their young people. And so that's going to be a delicate grant, and it hasn't gone public yet, even though I'm talking about it in public, and so that's really exciting. So I'm going to stop. I have lots of time to talk the rest of the night with everyone else. Thank you so much.
So, taking an interesting poll here, before you knew you were coming and even knew that I was on the agenda, how many of you knew about the organization Out As I Want to Be? Oh good, so we have some oldies and some newbies. So I'm up here to talk really specifically about what's going on with youth. Out As I Want to Be is a nonprofit organization in Rockland. We do cover, however, as far south as Booth Bay and Wiscasset, and as far north as Belfast and Searsport and inland. So we have Lincoln, Knox, and Waldo counties. And so Why is it so important to do this work with youth? We have the same problem, I have the same problem with a lot of people saying, marriage equality, what's the problem, everything's fine here. The reality is that not everything is fine here, particularly for our youth. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of bad news, but then I'm gonna give you good news, okay? So the bad news is that here in Maine, 8 out of 10 LGBTQ youth experience harassment on a very regular basis. We have 3 to 4 times the rate of suicide with these youth in the state of Maine as their peers. They are at very high risk of skipping school, of not staying in school. They also comprise 25 to 40% of the homeless teen population. Here in Maine, these are Maine statistics, okay? Now, a recent survey that just came out of GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, which is a national organization, has reinforced these statistics, and they haven't changed in the last couple of years. Nationally, it's 76% are experiencing harassment. We're 8 out of 10. Not good news. It's not getting better, okay? And the really irritating, shall I say, thing about this is that, one of the gifts of Maine is that we are a community-based state. We care about each other. We are community-focused. We solve problems that are happening in our communities. And this is a problem that is not okay. This is not acceptable in the state of Maine. I feel this personally, but I do believe as a state, this is our problem, and we need to deal with it, okay? So that's the bad news, okay? Anybody shocked by those statistics? Yeah, it's bad news. It's really bad news. So the good news is that we know what we can do to address it, okay? And Out As I Wanna Be has been in existence since 1996. And we, as Elise said, we are the only organization in the Mid-Coast up to this point, and Quinn is going to talk about something that Quinn is trying to get going, which I think is awesome, and we're looking forward to working with you on that. But we are the only nonprofit in this region that is working with LGBTQ youth, and we've been doing it for a while. For the last 10 years, we have operated a drop-in program on a weekly basis in Rockland. We have an office in Rockland. The youth can come. This is a safe space. They come, we cook a home-cooked dinner, and for, unfortunately, a number of them, that's the best food that they have. This is a space where they can come and ask questions. This is a space where they can come and play with their PGPs, their preferred gender pronouns. And let me tell you, one day it's this, and the next day it's that, because they're exploring what's happening for them, okay? And this is a safe space for them. So that's a wonderful, important resource for our entire region. But the reality is, okay, we have 0 public transportation, okay? So for this large region that we have, most of our youth cannot get to Rockland, all right? So recognizing that, our board of directors and the staff has been working over the last year to try to do more work in the schools, okay? Why is that important? Because a recent study out of British Columbia, which had 22,000 students and 92% of the high schools in the province reporting, documented that schools that have gay, straight, trans alliances, which are clubs within the school creating safe space, in schools that have them for 3 years or more, there is a 50% reduction in bullying and harassment. 50%. There is a over 50% reduction in suicide ideation and attempts. And not just for LGBTQ youth, but also for heterosexual boys. Interesting, okay? So gay, straight, trans alliances are a critical way of making a change in schools. Why is that important? Because for most of our youth, they get on the school bus in the morning, they go to school, and then they get the school bus and go home. Now for most of them, home is not a supportive environment. And if schools are not, and it's a place of high volume of discrimination, we can change that as soon as we can, and it's really important to do that. So the good news is, recognizing that that's a huge resource within the schools, we have been working over the last year, and we, in the last year, have doubled the number of GSTAs in this region. Okay, we used to have 3, we now have 6. We added Wiscasset this year, which was wonderful. We are starting one in Madomic Valley High School in Marlborough. pretty awesome, because that's my hometown, or where I live now. And then Searsport High School now has a GSTA. You fortunately have had one here in Lincoln Academy for a long time, which has been great. So now we have 6, okay? And that's a very important piece of the work that AUD is doing, to spread safe spaces within the schools for the youth who can't get to Rockland. Okay, that's a big priority for us. And the other piece is to recognize that this is going to take a village. This is going to take community, okay? So we're bringing in some trainings in Rockland. We did one in Rockland for suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth in August. We did a mental health first aid training in Thomaston this last month. And we'll be bringing some more trainings and workshops in to which we invite school providers, faith community members, mental health providers. We need to get the word out about what these issues are and how to support these youth. So those are the priorities for OUT in the coming years. Now, we have 6 GSTAs. We still have 13 high schools in our region that don't have that. So we have a high priority of making that happen. And bringing in the trainings and helping folks to really understand these issues, critical. This is near and dear to my heart, folks. We as a community, we as the Mid-Coast region, have the opportunity to really make a change for rural youth who are isolated and who are at high risk. We can do this. We can do this if we do it together. So I'm going to stop there. You can ask all kinds of questions. Oh, I just got the time. Look at that. I didn't even look at the clock. Yay! So please ask questions, and I will stick around later. And there's some materials about outside if you have any things you want to take back. So thank you.
Good evening. I thought before I actually get started that it might be useful to all of you if I outline some of the terminology that we're using tonight. I know that the terminology of LGBTQ can be new for some of you, and if you're not familiar with it, it's very easy to drown in a pool of alphabet soup. So I thought I might just quickly tell you what LGBTQ means. So L stands for lesbian, which is generally referring to women who are romantically or sexually attracted to other women. Gay specifically refers to men who are attracted to other men, although many women also choose to use that as an identity. Bisexual, or bi, as the community usually abbreviates it to, is referring to men or women who are attracted to both men or women, and frequently other genders as well. And transgender, which is my personal identity, not up to the microphone, am I? Transgender it's what we call an umbrella term. And so it is referring to a group of more specific identities that describe people whose gender that they were assigned at birth. So you're born, doctor takes a look at you and says that you're a boy or a girl. Transgender people are people for whom that does not match the reality of who they are. And then the Q stands, depending on who you ask, either for questioning, so people who haven't figured out who they are yet, or for queer, which is kind of a catch-all for everyone else. And I have to say, among my generation, we don't actually generally use the term LGBT. We generally just say queer. To be an umbrella term, there's a lot more identities than just being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender that my generation has really embraced. And so we like to use an umbrella term because every time we add a letter to that LGBT, it gets much more inconvenient to say, but also it's further excluding anyone who we don't add to that. So in the interest of being fully inclusive, I'm going to use queer, and I recognize that for some of you in here that may have been a term that was offensive in your youth. It's certainly something that the community has been working on reclaiming since the 1990s, and something that many in my generation wear proudly. So I'm going to use that, but I recognize that there might be some history of that in the room. So why am I here? Because these other two panelists are really quite exceptional. I felt a little out of place when I was asked, but I think that I'm wearing a couple of hats tonight. First of all, I'm local. I've lived 20 years in this community. I've lived the past 5 years or more, really, being out in the queer community under a couple different labels. I'm transgender. Transgender rights are really the forefronts of much of the queer movement right now. It's certainly very public and in the media's eye. And finally, I'm a millennial. And millennials have an entirely different view on this set of issues, and really every generation has come before us. And so I feel like my job tonight is to make sure that those perspectives are really effectively articulated. But I thought I might tell you a little bit about what I've done and what I've learned from it. So, as my biography said, I was involved in the development of the Lincoln Academy GSA. When I joined the GSA in my sophomore year, we had 7 members and no advisor. And the Lincoln Academy was trying to push us out because they don't like advisor-less clubs, and frankly, at the time, it wasn't a very friendly administration. And I ended up getting elected to its leadership. I'd really love to say that that was because I wanted to be the leadership. In reality, they were serving something really good in the cafeteria that day, and I missed the meeting. It's the last time I missed the meeting, but over the course of 3 years, with me and with my friends in the organization, we worked really hard. And we went from having 7 members and being an outcast group in the school to having 56 members and being the single largest student body. And as perspective of a queer person in that school, when I came out as gay my freshman year, I was bullied in the locker room. I was actually asked to change in a separate bathroom off the course of the gym. And I don't think I was the first out gay person at Lincoln, but I was certainly the first visible gay person at Lincoln. And those first 2 years at school were lonely, but by the time I graduated, we had over a dozen out queer youth in the school, and so GSAs really do make a huge difference. But, of course, I graduated, and by the time you graduate, or maybe 7 or 8 months beforehand, you really don't care what's going on in your high school anymore. And, I went to college. I went to a small college in suburban Chicago. I joined a group called Equal out there, which was a feminist and queer rights organization, and I wrote for my college paper as the queer rights staff writer, and I covered a number of really wonderful speakers out there, and that was an educational period, but I was dealing with a number of personal issues, mostly having to do with the fact that when I went to college, I had intended to do the process called transitioning, so going from your assigned gender into your actual gender, and that really didn't go well for me at college because that student environment wasn't there yet, and I wasn't really the person to make that happen. And so I left college, and I came back to Maine, and I transitioned to becoming who I am now. My 2 years living in the trans community in this state have been really some of the most exciting and devastating of my life. I look at my friends in the trans community, and what I see is dire. I see them unemployed or underemployed at best. I see them losing their house. I see them losing their family. I was just on Facebook before we started this tonight, and we're trying to plan a little Thanksgiving dinner because so many of us don't have a Thanksgiving to go to. So that's really weighing on a number of people in the community. I see over and over again my friends having to make the decision as to whether or not they get the health care they need, or whether or not they get to eat 3 meals a day. And I see that greatly out of the Portland community. I'm involved with an organization called the Maine Transgender Network, which does some wonderful work in Portland and Bangor. But for every problem I see with a Portland or Bangor or nearby their trans person, the problems that they face are tenfold once you get into rural Maine. We've talked about some of the transportation problems in Mid-Coast Maine. Just to give you an idea, the Mid-Coast Maine is approximately twice the size of Rhode Island, and with about 1/10 of the population. So there's really no providers in our state, or in this region of the state. So if you need health care, if you need mental health care, if you need to see a specialist, you need to go to either Portland or Bangor. And for people who are deciding whether or not they get to eat at night, that's really not possible. And so because of that, I've been working with some other trans people in the area to start a new organization so that there's no longer only one LGBT group in Mid-Coast, and we call it the Mid-Coast Trans Collective. And we have our first meeting in this room tomorrow night. We're very excited about that. We're working to be mostly a community organizing group, so that's just a safe space to be trans and a safe space to explore your identity. We're also hoping to work with some providers here, the hospitals around here. I've personally experienced some pretty severe discrimination just trying to get a blood test at our local hospital here, and so we're hoping to work with them as well as with the schools to make sure that providers are really up to date on what they need to know to deal with trans people. And that brings me to the last little lens that I'm looking through, and that's as a millennial, I think I have a very different perspective on what the future of queer rights activism looks like. If you look at the millennial point of view of we're not facing a very good-looking world. We are unemployed and underemployed. We're largely suffocating under the debt of going to college, tens of thousands of dollars of debt just to get an education for a job that you're not going to get. We're looking at a life in which we're going to have 5 careers and 10 jobs, and most of those haven't been invented yet. We're coming from families where the divorce rate has been the highest among our generation ever. So our parents were largely divorced, and for the most part, we haven't known our extended families. So how we define our families is quite different. We lack the connection to place that many previous generations have had because we've moved frequently and we will move, and because our families aren't from the place that we were born. We're by and large not religious, and probably the most significant is we live in an instantaneous and global society. And so anything that you might think is unique about you, I can guarantee it is a Facebook group with 2,000 members. And what that means for millennials is that means that our traditional ways of defining self no longer work. They no longer apply to us. And how we redefine that, how we answer that question of who we are and how we make continuity in our lives in a rapidly changing world is going to define my generation. And how we tell our own stories has to be completely reworked. And I think we'll spend our lives figuring out how to do that. But the queer culture that I belong to is suggesting a first step. And we're suggesting, let's get back to that most basic aspect of being human. And that's, who are you in your body, and who do you love? And let's explore every possible variation of that. The answer doesn't really matter. What matters is that we celebrate our freedom to ask it, and our freedom to become our most authentic selves. Really what it comes down to for my generation is it's all about identity. And I think that future is far more compelling than anything I see on the media. This change in politics represents a fairly substantive change in meaning and purpose for the movements from our preceding generations in the queer community. For so long in the queer community, our mission in terms of civil and human rights has been based on the ideals of tolerance and acceptance. And these are wonderful, and we should be working for them. But our strategy towards achieving them has depended upon normalizing different identities and demonstrating this idea of sameness, which erases any meaning in those identities which we are fighting to recognize. If you all remember the marriage equality campaign a few years ago, if you can remember the commercials, think back to what those families on TV looked like. They were very normal-looking people. They were happy, white families where the women had long hair and played with babies, and the men wore khaki shorts and polo shirts and played ball with their kids. And that's wonderful, and those families exist, but when we limit ourselves to presenting only an identity that is palatable to the rest of the world, we are only asking to be yet another one of those civil rights movements that we look back upon 20 years later and say, look at all these failed promises. And so I think we need to change our direction. We need to change our direction into looking into celebrating our diversity and rejecting this idea of normalcy. It doesn't truly exist. We're all fairly crazy. But as you've heard tonight, there's a lot of work that has to be done before we get there. Our legal and health systems suffocate diversity, and they assume that you are who your doctors said you were at birth. Our education system puts children into one of 2 false boxes that define how they are treated for their entire education. And our social culture is not a safe one for anyone who challenges the rigid lines of identity applied to them at birth. This has to change, and we're going to need your help. The queer community will always be a minority in the world, and so we need you to be our allies. And being an ally involves several steps. The first one is to show up, so congratulations. You guys are doing a good job. Show up to places like this, show up to our events. If you want to be truly supportive, in a couple of weeks in Portland is the Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th. It'll be, I think, at City Hall. It'll be at City Hall in Portland. We're working on it. Trans Day of Remembrance is a time when we remember all those trans individuals around the world who've been murdered for their gender identity in the last year. I think the list is getting up near 300 this year. It doesn't go down because as the community becomes more visible, the murder rate actually goes up. But showing up isn't just showing up to special events. Showing up is a habit to be in. Show up in the lives of the queer people that you know, and continue showing up and be there for them. The next step around my dinner table, we call it the don't sound like an idiot step. We might more politely call it being well educated on the issues. I can't say how many times I've been expected to explain my gender and explain my gender history. And I'm usually happy to do it because I think it's important that I'm okay being that person. But for the most part, people shouldn't have to explain who they are, who they love constantly, and they shouldn't have to explain what the terms that they use to define themselves mean. So it's important to take the time to know the terminology, know the laws that we're up against, know how to be truly respectful to us. And finally, fight the fight with us. Stand with us. Our causes need money to fund them. We need people to sign our petitions. We need people to provide us spaces to be safe. We need people to stand with us and protest. So I thank you very much.
Well, I imagine you were all as blown away as I was by this incredible presentation by these panelists. Thank you so much. And you probably have a few questions. So, but I wanted to read you something. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just read part. Because we talked at dinner tonight about the progress that has been made in a lot of these issues. And we also realized that there are setbacks. And this letter that was in the paper today, and I can go into the whole detail, but it was interesting to me that this woman felt the need to express her negativity. And she refers to, she's complaining about a newspaper, and she says, she just wants that newspaper to know that having no affiliation with that college can call its own shots and can, oh no, here's the part I wanted to get. This particular newspaper can continue its hissy fit that needs the facts to face facts. More people in this country, she says, do not accept the LGBTQ agenda than those who do. So it just struck me, out of the blue, she felt she had this need to say this, and I'm going, thank goodness you guys have the courage and the smartness to face this kind of adversity. So any questions now? Yes?
I just want to make a statement about that article. I think that it's not that there's more people who are against it, there's more people who are indifferent. And if you're indifferent, that's as harmful.
Thanks. Yes, Polly? Do you have a question? Do you want it directed at one particular person?
No, actually, this is a question I'd like to direct to all of them. A few weeks ago, there was a very interesting article in the New York Times, I think it was in the magazine section, on transgendered students at Wellesley College, which could have been any of the women's colleges. This is happening. And it's throwing colleges into a fit, and they don't quite know what to do about it, but they're coming up with some interesting alternatives. Now, a point that the author of this article made, I think was quoting someone else, was that the whole concept of gender is really coming apart. And why even have a word called gender? I mean, Quinn did a good job of sort of separating out all the pieces of gender for us. But I'd just like to hear your comment on that, because it was something I never thought of before. But it was strong, it was very strongly put in this article.
So is the question, why have gender?
Well, that was the first time I'd ever seen this suggested. Why the concept of gender seems to be falling apart.
I think perhaps a better question might be is why have the gender binary, which is this idea that there is man or woman and they are opposite of one another.
Yeah.
especially for people whose sense of gender and sense of self falls outside of that binary. As to why we should have gender, you know, I've been someone who's been harmed by that binary, but I have to say I love telling people I'm a woman. I love going out. It is something that I'm proud of myself for. And I think gender is truly a beautiful thing that we perform, that we feel, but I don't think it should determine whether or not you're capable of doing something, and I don't think it should determine really the course of your life to the extent that it does now.
Want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with everything, Quinn, that you just said, and I love your question. And I was thinking about this myself recently because we facilitate something called Trans Ally Training at Equality Maine, and we do it at lots of different places. And I was actually at one of the trainings that we did for young people last week, and I got to sit in and actually be part of the training. And there's an activity where it says feminine on one part of the room and then masculine on the other side, and then everybody's asked to line up with people and put yourself where you feel like you are on that continuum, and if you feel like someone else is in the space that you should be in, how do you negotiate that with that person? And it was fantastic, and the young people did really well. I get goosebumps when I talk about it, because it brought up this thought, I think, of what we're attaching to how we express our gender is so binary, and that if you like sports, you're told by society or you identify more as masculine, when in reality you just like sports, and it shouldn't have to go necessarily with this gender expression or gender identity. And so I think this goes back to Quinn, what you were saying, that we are now at this place. Two things are happening. One, we still have a lot of work to do, and within that, we are also able to push that we have this identity expression that needs to be happening more, and then it still creates this space over here where we're saying, well, there's still a lot of work to be done. So.
I'd like to add, I think, certainly from what I see, this is exploding at a very rapid rate. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
You can hear me okay back there? So it's exploding at an incredible rate. So my daughter is in her 20s. For her, this LGBT issue is a non-issue. Like, why do we even talk about it? I mean, it's just done. It's done, you know, but no big deal. The youth that we serve it out, I every day get educated by them. Because we use PGPs, preferred gender pronouns, because one day they'll want to be he, him, and his. And the next day they're experimenting with she, her, and hers. And it's a constant movement with them as that generation is in a very different place from our generation, even my daughter's generation. This is changing so rapidly, and I think it's for the better. We get more diversity in this country, we get more opportunity to live and learn from different people, and however it falls out with our youth out, okay by us. That's what we're trying to do, provide that space for them to explore safely and supported who they are, whatever it is on that continuum. And it is not the binary anymore. We're moving away from that so fast, it's not even funny.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you
Oh,
all.
Thank
You all for great presentations, very powerful. And what you seem to be talking about is the need to change attitudes and have education. My question is, what about our legal structures? Is there an agenda for change in the law in the state of Maine that is necessary? And if so, what's the plan to achieve that?
So,
We have laws,
So
they
we
don't
have-
get implemented.
right.
And they're-
So we have a couple things that are happening in the state of Maine. So we have the non-discrimination law, which has been hard fought by probably many of you in this room. It took, what, 20-something years of, I think, a lot of work to get that. And so that's fantastic, but it doesn't keep us safe. And that's scary, and it keeps us safe in some regard, but it doesn't when it comes to transgender healthcare discrimination, because that's still happening. And what's also so who is familiar with LD 1428 from last legislative session, also known as the We call it the so-called religious freedom bill. So when you hear religious freedom, and everyone in this room is like, yeah, of course we want religious freedom. We want people to be whoever they are and to believe in whatever they believe in. But that is not what that bill was saying. What that bill was going to allow, what it did in Arizona, and what this little agenda that's happening across our nation, if we want to talk about agendas, like that Katie's article, is to allow people to legally discriminate against folks. And so what could happen is, and it's not just against LGBTQ people, but it could be anybody where you could utilize your religious belief, whether it's in some sort of doctrine or not, and say, well, you know what, I own this apartment complex, but Jeanne, you are an unmarried mother, and I don't rent to women who aren't married. I'm sorry. Or you know what, I'm not going to treat you in my business because you're in an interracial relationship, or you are transgender, and so there's but that those types of bills would allow that. And so we really believe that one of those is going to come again this session, and it's going to come a heck of a lot stronger than last session. So it's going to be a pretty heavy lift, I think. So we'll need everyone's support in this room to make sure that doesn't happen. We also have the anti-bullying bill, but that doesn't stop bullying. So, Jeanne was saying her daughter that this is a non-issue, but you also heard that there are teens in school, and Quinn, who was just in school, is like, but I was teased and I was ridiculed and I was bullied. So it's a non-issue to some of the youth, but it's definitely not to all. And folks who know about the bathroom issue that happened a couple years ago, where a grandparent sent their grandson to school to do some of that bullying on behalf of the family, basically, against a transgender student who was using the bathroom of their gender. And it was really awful. And so those things are still happening. There are laws there in effect, but it doesn't mean that the behavior changes as quickly.
And I'd like to follow up on that, because that is true. The laws are on the books. The anti-bullying laws are on the books. We do not see the changes happening in the schools that need to happen as a result of that. So while it is really important to have legal changes, the attitudinal, you put your finger on it, the attitudinal changes are essential. And the behavioral changes are essential. So I have an invitation to everybody in this room. As a result of you coming here tonight, my invitation is I'd like you to think of one thing you're going to do differently when you walk out. One thing you're going to say differently, one way you're going to act differently that would be supportive of LGBTQ folk in your life, on the street, in Mid-Coast Maine. Doesn't matter to me what it is. I just want you to think about it and make a choice to do one thing, because that's what's going to change the attitudes. And you will ripple out to the people around you.
And as Jeanne mentioned the word schools,
Yes.
I was just wondering, a little survey, is there anybody in this audience who is an employee of a school district? I'm very, thank you so much for being here, because we really know that that's a very important population that we have to get this message to. Any other questions? Yes, Barbara?
Yes, I remember when the government had to readjust their paperwork, saying black, white, or other. There's a lot of other, and the list has gotten longer. Has the paperwork started to include male, female, transgender, bi? No. When's that going?
We're getting, we're starting to get partnered, as opposed to spouse. We're starting to get partnered. It's a process.
Legally speaking, on legal forms, they still ask for sex.
Well, yeah, sometimes you have it.
Right.
But I think that's a good point. And there are certainly places where asking for gender identity is significant, but on most legal documents, why would you need it? As a trans person, I'd rather not have to divulge my gender identity every time I fill out paperwork.
Yes, sir.
In the work that you're doing with our public schools, particularly Jeanne, in establishing the GSTA, are you also making efforts in working with superintendents of school districts about policy improvements, if not changes, about how they deal with not only the issue of acceptance, but also this kind of enforcement, disciplinary law side, because they're kind of the front line of maybe doing something that's transformational. So I'm interested to hear about your work.
Yeah. So the schools are absolutely in place in rural mid-coast area, absolutely in place. Now, we have the Gay Straight Alliances. It has been an interesting journey getting Gay Straight Alliances in the schools. Not surprising, Maine schools are each unique to themselves. Districts are each very unique. So, for example, and I will not name names, but one of the schools we now have a GSTA in, I went in, I met with the staff, they had the principal support, it started the following week, they had a group of people, done. Another one has taken a year to get the principal on board, they then decided they had to go to the school board for a policy change. So the work in making school change is very individual, very labor intensive, and very relationship building. It's critical that way. And that's, this is just the way it is here. So the answer is we are looking at how to access the superintendents directly as kind of a producer effect, if you will, so that support is there. But it's not high on their agenda right now. I mean, look at what's happening in terms of the consolidations, the breakups of the districts. It's not high on the agenda. So oftentimes the best way it happens is that we have a teacher in the school and youth in the school who want something to happen. And when that's the case, then we can go in and support them and meet with the key people and have it happen. And good news is it happens like that. Takes a year. I still consider that to be a wonderful change. So it is a process. And OUT is we are a small organization. I'm a part-time ED, and we have somebody who does the drop-in program 10 hours a week. So we made this happen on that small number of people. That's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get more community support, and so that we can have a dedicated staff person who can actually be doing this. We're doing quarterly networking of GSTAs to try to support them, because even once it's involved in the school, these are teachers who are not getting paid to do it. This is their extra time, and they need support. So how do we keep those existing GSTAs going while we're still trying to build the new ones? 13 more schools still to go. And that doesn't even address the middle schools, where frankly the bullying and harassment is worse than it is in the high schools. So we have a big agenda, even in the Mid-Coast region. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to add to that with the superintendent. So we sent out a letter to every single superintendent in the state about a year and a half ago, offering policy development support on how to rewrite policy, how to make sure that it's not only compliant with the law, but really authentic to that school and that community. We didn't get any responses at all. And so this past year, I was like, I know what we're going to do. We're going to send it to every principal, because the superintendents are too busy and they can't talk to all their principals. And so we sent it to every single principal and offered the same thing. And we offered free training, and we didn't get any responses. So I was like, all right, fine. We're going to host a conference, and we're going to offer it really, really low cost, and we're going to feed people, and we're going to offer it to teachers and educators, school leaders, and social workers. And we hosted it 2 weeks ago. We're going to do one with OUT and Glisten down east, and Lewiston Auburn Outright is going to come up here, and we're going to host another one-day conference to do the same thing. The turnout was incredible. People were like thanking us. It was all day. It was fantastic. We've already had 2 offers to either host it at Orono or Husson University. We might do, it's just, the educators want it, the people want it. So we've also reviewed probably like 80% of reviewing every single policy that's happening across the state to make sure, I hate to say that, to see if people are compliant, schools are compliant, but we want to offer support. We don't want to we want to help. We don't want to, penalize. Not that we penalize anything.
But the relationship building is critical to
Yes.
having people be responsive.
Yep.
So one of the things that Elise and I are talking about is, can we bring in an anti-bullying harassment training as part of what we're trying to do in the Mid-Coast, and we will bring in different people because we've made the connections and we're working on the relationships. So really figuring out the way to get people to come in To be interested is the key.
So it doesn't work without student leadership. It's necessary because you can offer fantastic programs and the kids don't care about it, they won't show up. So, I mean, your Equality Maine's youth leadership training is really, is that what you call it?
The New Leaders Project,
New
but
Leaders
it's,
Project, yeah, but their training of queer youth is significant because, you know, we're responsive to teachers being supportive, and certainly having a mentor relationship with the teacher is very valuable, but these are largely student-led, and it's not an issue that the generation currently in middle and high school is unaware of. It's just a matter of convincing them that it's worth their time to do something.
Yes, please.
Is there a support group for parents who, we need sometimes to understand and to be able to, I'm afraid, Quinn, I did the same thing to my child. I almost expected him to educate me, and when you said that, it spoke to me that I need to be the one to get the education, but where do I do that?
so there's PFLAG. I'm on the board of PFLAG, actually. They're an incredible organization. They just changed their name from PFLAG to PFLAG, which sounds really funny, but it used to stand for, we all joke about this, it used to stand for Parents, Friends of Lesbians and Gays, but now it's PFLAG, which just means that they're inclusive of the parents, friends of lesbians and gays, but also open to the entire community. And they have chapters across our state. I want to say there's one even up in, yeah, the Portland one's fantastic as well. I know someone that I'm on the board of, but there's also online support. But I'm sure Jeanne and I can probably connect you with some people who can just, you know, make sure you're using the terminology and to feel like you can be a really great advocate and ally for your child.
And certainly for trans-specific organizations like Maine Transnet, like Midcoast Trans Collective, they offer trans and allies meetings, so that's meant for trans people and their immediate family members and their spouses. That can be, even if you have a great internet resource, trans people, because there's oftentimes medical things associated with that, it can be so complicated. So I know Maine Transnet specifically offers an allies-only meeting where they're helping specifically parents just to figure out what they need to do and how they can best be supportive, while also offering them support through what can most certainly be a difficult time. So.
And make sure that you're on our email list, because we send, these trainings we've done have been open to everybody. And the other thing is that in the spring, in the winter and spring, we're working on, is anybody here familiar with the Family Acceptance Project in California? It's this whole initiative to help families be more supportive of LGBTQ youth. So we'll be working in the winter and spring to develop a training and some workshops around that for families. Up to this point, you know, we've been safe space for the youth. And now we recognize that this is a community issue, this is a family issue, we all need to be part of the village. So you'll see more and more of that, but just make sure you're on our email list and you can get that from New York.
Yes, Mary.
I just wanted to compliment Quinn in particular. We were neighbors for all your life, and you. It's hard for me to believe that you're only 20, because you've been through so much, and you are extremely mature and very articulate, and you convey a great sense of comfort and help the rest of us to be more understanding and accepting. And I think you're doing a terrific job.
That sounds like a really good time to call it quits, because this is wonderful. What a high point you put us on, Mary, because you expressed exactly what I think so many of us in this audience feel tonight. And we know Quinn because she's been here, I'm going to get better, she's been here all her life, and you know, it was just delightful to have Jeanne and Elise lend their insights and their expertise, and I can't thank you enough for coming and educating us.
Thank you all for being here.
And please, we don't kick you out, let's middle down and chat for a little bit. There's a sign-up sheet out there for anybody who'd like to leave an email address for either Jeanne, Elise, or Quinn.